Builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 38 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. It is Friday, and we are live again for another episode. This is where we discuss the hardest talk about the hardest form of money. If we haven't met before, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 2 decades of my life obsessing over the subject of Bitcoin investing and money, and we go live each and every week to give you the latest in this week in Bitcoin, in macro and geopolitics. And we try and put it all together so that you are prepared for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. A world where central banks will probably oppress you and you need to protect yourself. A world where artificial intelligence will mean you will need to replace your earned income with investment income. And a world where Bitcoin will be the one that protects those from inflation based upon everything we have seen in this industry so far. So we're going to be discussing a few things as the main topics today. Firstly, we're going to be discussing the role of governments and selling Bitcoin, because we have seen a lot of Bitcoin selling from the German government. And we're going to be discussing the real implications of it and what it's actually going to mean into the future. And also, for those of you that were victims of the Celsius Ponzi Scheme, the lawsuit has been launched. We are coming after all the insiders that took from the $20 billion, the $3 billion Ponzi scheme. And we're going to be discussing all about the case that was launched this week. Finally, once and for all, we're suing the insiders. So I'll share all about that, and let's jump straight in with Bitcoin as the main topic, where we start with. Okay. So firstly, what is the theory behind governments? Governments are meant to fulfill market failures where the market fails. For example, the market doesn't often decide to build roads and cater for things that the market doesn't want to cater for. And so the government steps in and they tax people accordingly. And then they're also meant to perform a role, depending on whether it's more right wing or left wing, of redistributing wealth from the wealthy to those that are not being looked after by the system or can't drag themselves out. Those with disabilities, those that don't have income, and those that are unable to look after themselves. Because when you put people in a position where they're being destroyed by the financial system, they tend to be the ones that go to desperation, and desperation tends to take you to criminal activities and all sorts of stuff. And so the government is meant to be implementing, let's call it the Robin Hood theory. The Robin Hood theory of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But they are failing miserably. In fact, the current economy, as we have been covering week after week, is doing the exact opposite of what a government is meant to be doing. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's being propped up by a Federal Reserve, which is turning any capitalist economy into a socialist economy. And those socialist economies, one by one, with central bank digital currencies, are becoming full-blown dependency and communist countries step by step. Every single day, China is looking more and more like America, and America is looking more and more like China. And they meet in the middle with a central bank digital currency eventually. And we need a resistance movement, which is Bitcoin. The resistance to protect yourself from the oppression that can be inflicted upon people by governments and central banks depleting your wealth and taking all of the world's money and putting it into the assets that are more and more further away from what the average person can afford. So rather than you being able to afford real estate, people like myself and people that have got on the right side of history, and I'd like more of you to get on the right side of the financial system, end up benefiting from all the redistribution in the wrong direction. And so we will discover and we'll discuss in the macro section, what is being done and what the governments are doing and what the central banks are doing at the moment in order to try and do something about inflation. But everybody knows that it is redistributing wealth in the opposite way of the Robin Hood theory. It is taking it from those that can't afford and are on the wrong side of the central bank and have to borrow at 30% interest through credit cards and payday loans, and redistributing it over to those that are closest to the central bank that can borrow at 0% and benefit because they've got the assets to protect themselves from the resulting inflation. So the German government is trying something new right now, and they are engaging in a brand new wealth redistribution program. And in that wealth redistribution program, they are giving anybody in the world the opportunity to redistribute some of the wealth that the German government confiscated from those that they classified as criminals, and selling those Bitcoin to anybody that wants to buy them. And in the process, crash the price of Bitcoin from approximately $74,000 to a low of about $54,000, $53,000. Now it's come back up to around about $57,000, and they've only got a little bit left. But they engaged in a brand new wealth redistribution system. And it is the Robin Hood theory. But unfortunately, if you're German, then you're paying the inflation from the euro, because they are taking the Bitcoin that they had, the 50,000 Bitcoin, and they're selling it to anybody that wants to buy it. And they're buying it and they're selling it for euros, which a European central bank already has the authority to print. And Germany is already big Europe already and dominates Europe at this stage. So they're taking the hardest form of money and redistributing it to anybody that wants to buy it, and then knocking down the price in the process. And some people are deciding to do the opposite of the Robin Hood theory. They're deciding to take their Bitcoin and sell it alongside the German government and buy some pounds and buy some euros or buy some dollars and engage in the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme that guarantees that your wealth will be destroyed if you save in those fiat currencies. And you are also funding the proof of weapons network, which is taking our world step by step into something that every single week is looking closer and closer to World War III. And if you watch the NATO summit this week, you will know what I'm talking about. We're going to be covering that in the geopolitical section. But the real Robin Hood theory is the real wealth redistribution. And the beautiful thing about this is you have a choice whether you participate or engage, because you don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can buy $10 worth of Bitcoin, $100 worth of Bitcoin, whatever shitty fiat currency you hold. Hopefully, if your government isn't oppressing you too much, and they're not destroying your currency too much, and you live in a country where they allow you to convert your fiat currency toilet paper backed by a proof of weapons network into Bitcoin, then you are able to participate and resist the oppression of the central banks. So what has the German government done? And we're going to be going through some of the German governments. There's only one of those, but some of the governments, and they're all looking the same anyway, so we might as well be talking the same story. So as we speak today, and maybe it's been updated in the last few hours, the German government had 50,000 Bitcoin, a position that most governments in the world, if they knew how to read economics textbooks, and I'm not talking about the ones that Keynes taught you after Bretton Woods in order to exercise the agenda of the central banks to destroy everybody's wealth. I'm talking about the Austrian ones that took classical economics that said the free market is the best way of allocating assets, but said it doesn't work when you have central banks in the middle, like classical monetary economics, and recognize that Adam Smith's invisible hand works best when there is hard money. And many governments knew that it is the government's job to provide that hard money, but instead they outsourced it to the private central banks, who outsourced it to the private banks, who get interest on the world's largest regulated Ponzi schemes called fiat currencies that drive the world into debt oppression and debt slavery. But now they are back down to 6,400 Bitcoin. We know this because we're able to track the German government's wallet address. So while everyone that has a Bitcoin and puts it on a blockchain is pseudonymous, we don't know exactly who owns it. But once we can identify that these are the coins that the German government owns, we can then track those transactions just like the government tries to track us. And so we knew that on June the 17th, the German government had 49,878 Bitcoin. And then by June the 24th, because of the blockchain, we knew that they had 47,178 Bitcoin. And by June the 30th, 46,191 Bitcoin. And by July the 1st, 44,691 Bitcoin. By July the 2nd, 43,458 Bitcoin. By July the 3rd, 43,358 Bitcoin. And then July the 4th, the Independence Day, when the Americans fought the oppression of the Brits and now have the oppression of all of the Congress people that are bought by the Israeli lobby, the military industrial complex lobby, the big pharma lobby, and the banking lobby. On that day, they went down to 42,273. They're really going in the wrong direction. By July the 4th, they only had 40,526 Bitcoin. By July the 6th, they had 38,826 Bitcoin. By July the 8th, they had 27,460 Bitcoin. By July the 9th, they had 22,845 Bitcoin. They are now over half the stack of the world's best digital hard sound money, the scarcest digital resource the world has ever seen. And on July the 12th, today, they are down to 6,400 Bitcoin. And we can look into the future, just like we do with Bitcoin Pizza Guy, the person that in 2010 persuaded somebody to buy 2 pizzas through Papa John's Pizza and accept 10,000 Bitcoin for two pizzas. We will look back forever at the US government and recognize what those Bitcoins would have been worth in 10 years, 20 years, if they had kept them. And we shall compare that from their Bitcoin that they sold to national debt ratio. And that ratio over time will get destroyed and demonstrate to the entire world that starting today, July the 12th, 2024, everybody probably thought that Bitcoin was too high and Bitcoin can't possibly go any higher, like they have every single year since I've been involved in this industry in 2011, when people believe it's too late, I've missed the boat, because they don't understand how to read supply and demand. But more and more people are getting on board and understanding it. This could have fixed. This is the only thing that would allow me to believe that any government can reverse the effect of their debt-based Ponzi scheme and oppression and occupation by central banks without going into war. And they gave it away. Why? Because the German government has a massive military industrial complex, and it is occupied by the European Central Bank, and gave up its currency after all of the atrocities that it's been through in the past. It's hyperinflation that happened in the interwar period and everything that we saw. And now it is selling its hardest asset. It kind of reminds me of Gordon Brown. And Gordon Brown, for those of you that don't know, was one of our many prime ministers that kind of just jumped in and was gone and fast, and no one really knows who he is or who talks about it. But he took it upon himself to sell the entire gold supply of the UK government and sell it for $250, calling the bottom of the market. Will this be the turnaround? We don't know. It doesn't matter, because if you watched my video last week, you know what to do when Bitcoin is crashing. Check out that video if you haven't watched it as well. Now, what else can this do? It can also allow us to put an end to government corruption, because once a government identifies that this is our wallet and they want to say to the people, these are our Bitcoin, this is held in our treasury, this is our bet on the future of digital hard sound money, and that central banks, and they hedge themselves from their own occupation by central banks, remember that they can publish that just like Germany did, and we can track whether they're selling, whether they're holding, and genuinely what collateral they hold when they launch their central bank digital currencies into the future. Remember Bulgaria. If you weren't around in 2017, I remember it very, very well. They seized 213,000 Bitcoin from a group that they labeled as criminals in 2017. And Bulgaria, their national debt, around about 2020, has probably ballooned since then. In 2022, it was around $20 billion. By 2030, if they still have all of that Bitcoin, and theoretically, some of the models for Bitcoin play out, and let's just say, I'm not financial advice, I'm not saying that this will happen, but imagine if Bitcoin did reach $1 million by 2030 as some of the models that model the supply and demand economics of Bitcoin predict. They could have been out of national debt and they could have proven their sovereignty. They could have launched a central bank digital currency collateralized by that Bitcoin, because those Bitcoins would be worth $213 billion, assuming they maintained their steady debt at $20 billion. But the real question is, where are those Bitcoin? Bulgarian government. If I were a politician in Bulgaria, I would say, I'm going to show you where those Bitcoins are, and I'm going to publish the wallet address. And we're going to demonstrate that the government still has those Bitcoins and they didn't just go through the complete corruption. We know that OneCoin was backed most likely by the Bulgarian government, the Ponzi scheme. And Dr. Ruja, there's still a $5 million reward and bounty by the Department of Justice on Dr. Ruja for the OneCoin Ponzi scheme. But we know that those have probably disappeared into the pockets of the corrupt. But if they had published their address, and if we should hold Bulgarian government accountable, where are the 213,000 Bitcoins? Especially if it hits that critical mass that we believe Bitcoin, or I believe Bitcoin may hit. There was also an announcement this week, and excuse me if I get this these pronunciations wrong. Before I was talking about OneCoin, how about Huione, Huione? There was an announcement that there's something called Huione Guarantee Online Marketplace. And this is allegedly a place that is used by those connected to the leaders and the monarchy and the rulers and the emperors, whatever we call them now, in Cambodia. And because we can track the blockchain and we can see what governments are up to with their Bitcoins and their crypto scams, we know that this was also used in order to siphon off many, many different crypto scams with the support of the alleged support, according to Elliptic, which is a software that's able to track these things in measure the corruption and scams that happen across Southeast Asia. So the Cambodian, let me make sure I get this right. I wrote some notes on here. There's basically a conglomerate, and the blockchain data is able to be analyzed, and it's shown that it has connections to the Cambodia ruling Hun family. Again, sorry, butcher me. Let me know in the comments if I'm saying all these names wrong. If you know me by now, you know that I always get names wrong. And one of the things I'm infamous for as well. But basically, it's a technology where people can use the technology data, and allegedly they can use it for money laundering services. But the real money laundering we know that it needs to be tracked is the ones that the governments are actually executing. And allegedly, there are transactions that are being tracked through this that are totaling at least $11 billion. This holds the ruling class and the government's account. Imagine when those holdings that back central bank digital currencies into the future can be tracked and can be proven. And we can hold governments to account. If they decide we're going to launch a war and we're going to fund it. And our military industrial complex owns our Congress people. And these Congress people are voting us in the direction of causing more inflation for the everyday people by printing money and giving it to the military industrial complex companies. And that is leading to an oppression of the backing and the Bitcoin that backs that central bank digital currency in a Bitcoin standard. We get to audit that, and we can decide whether we want to use that central bank digital currency of the future, or we want to move over and transition to one that is on more sound principles. But we can see that they are laundering the proceeds of scams all around the world. And we know when you follow the money that it always goes back to the higher powers that allow these things to happen. So anyway, Elliptic was tracking those transactions, and we got to see that. What other governments are we able to track? Well, the one government that is leading the way, that spoke at the Bitcoin conference 4 years ago, the same one that Trump has announced he's speaking at this year, President Bukele in El Salvador, they published their wallet address, and they continue to buy 1 Bitcoin every single day. So the real question is, what is the US government, the Department of Justice, that took all those Bitcoins from Silk Road and various other people over time, and the 113,000 that they got from the crocodile of Wall Street who hacked Bitfinex? When are they going to happen? What's going to happen to those, and where are they going to go? We know what's happening to the Mt. Gox ones that are being redistributed, but this holds to a new level of accountability with all the corruption and proving of backing and forcing governments into better behavior, because those will be the central bank digital currencies we'll probably use in the future, as opposed to the ones where you can't see what they're backed by. And we still need to audit Fort Knox to know whether the Fed has all that gold. And it just magically, $2 trillion just disappears from Fort Knox, just like that. Poof. So where are the US Bitcoins? What's the Department of Justice going to do? What's Biden going to do with them? If Biden is still there, and if Trump comes in, which looks like a dead cert from here, what is Donald Trump going to do with those Bitcoins? Because he said that he is now a Bitcoin believer. And he has come to the Bitcoin community and said, please fund my political campaign. I took hundreds of millions from Israel, so we know what that means. But we're also going to take money from the Bitcoin community. And I'll come and speak there. But if you want to come and have a private little conference with me, you can contribute 60,000 worth of Bitcoin, and approximately 1,200 high-end tickets have been sold. And we get to see what happens to those Bitcoin that are contributed to the Trump campaign. Is he going to hold himself to releasing Russ Ulbricht, who's responsible for the government having these 200,000 Bitcoin? It sold a bunch of them and auctioned a bunch of them off. But it was the best trade the government has ever made. And it could be the backing of FedNow or their future central bank digital currency. But is Trump going to do what he said he's going to do? He said he's going to protect the world's right to have as many of the Bitcoins mined in America. He wants them made in America. As ridiculous as that sounds, we know that that's not true. But it's an ambition by keeping and supporting the mining companies and the incredible industry that is built up in America. If you didn't watch my previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, where I covered the US energy sector and all of its history and how that leads to today's mining, you might want to check that out this weekend if you're interested in finding out what's happening in America and whether Trump can make those remaining Bitcoins in America. But one of this large Bitcoin position that the Department of Justice has, ask him at the next Bitcoin conference this month in Nashville. And no, I don't have a coupon code. Fortunately, Bitcoin has given me enough freedom where I don't need to be worrying about any kind of sponsors or coupon codes or change my message in order to meet some of the vested interests that we know how the traditional media works. Fortunately, Bitcoin gave me all the financial freedom that I need in the world to remain 100% independent and truthful to what I believe to be the truth. And I'll document it every week on Bitcoin Hard Talk. And some things many people say, no, you're crazy, Simon. But at least we can share this journey together, because there was a time in 2011 when I was speaking just about banking reform. And I told the world about Bitcoin and tried to give away as much Bitcoin as possible, and told the world that this is money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. And everyone said, Simon, stay in your lane. Stop talking about Bitcoin. I liked it when you were talking about banking reform. Bitcoin is this crazy thing that is never going to succeed. But I persisted, and I will continue to do the same until people realize how the proof of weapons network and the importance of macro and geopolitics in the Bitcoin narrative, and remind people how we got here, why we got here, because it was originally a resistance movement against the central banks. And I'll continue to remind people of the importance of that. So in reaction to Trump, hold him accountable, as we always said, he's going to free Ross Ulbricht. He said that he's also going to fight against central bank digital currencies and ensure that people can self-custody their Bitcoin in America and support the Bitcoin mining industry. Now, make sure he doesn't sell. And he gives the US the opportunity to hedge against the Federal Reserve and have its own internal constitutional resistance movement against the Federal Reserve. Take those Bitcoins that is owned by the Department of Justice, transfer them over to Treasury, and prove to the American people, Trump, that you care about resisting the central bank, and you care about independence of Congress, so that you don't need to take the check from the Israeli lobbies, the banking lobbies, the big pharma lobbies, the military industrial complex lobbies, the proof of weapons network that is backed by banks as miners and lobby groups as nodes that decide where the money flows. Give America their chance to resist against it. And if you are the anti-war president, then that is the anti-war policy. Back proof of work. It's a peaceful resistance. Transfer those coins from the Department of Justice over to Treasury and show the world every year that you do the opposite of the German government. And you didn't steal them like the Bulgarian government. And you transparently added to your position like the El Salvador government. And show to the world that the US could actually end up with a world reserve currency backed by Bitcoin. But we know that won't happen. And we know why. Because the powers that be, that control the lobbies, that claim to be the world's largest democracies, will push the proof of weapons network and push for more war. But we know how to judge it, because we can check the Bitcoin blockchain. In reaction to all of these Bitcoiners saying, we like Trump now, I'm a one-party voter, the senators that represent Democrats are now scrambling to launch their cryptocurrency legislation. And apparently, let me make sure I get the name wrong. Here's another one I'm probably going to get. Stabenow Dimich. Sorry, Stabenow Dimich, if that's not how you pronounce your name. But she's sending plans to send her crypto bill to all of the fellow members of the Senate this week and show that Biden is still cool. Democrats still care about America, and they're not just controlled by the proof of weapons network and sending money to Ukraine, sending money to Israel, and sending money to push things forward in escalating with China in Taiwan after launching its trade wars that are really screwing up the relationship and the status quo. But they're looking to launch their legislation in terms of crypto regulations. And what are they trying to do? Well, they're going to be giving, according to the announcement, they're going to be protecting custody and ensuring solvency of exchanges, all good things. These are good roles for regulators. But also, they're going to give jurisdiction to the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, to be the regulator authority over what they call digital commodities. Rather than the Securities and Exchange Commission, which put forward a very government-led, democratic, anti-crypto, Operation Choke Point, bank lobby-funded resistance movement against the Bitcoin resistance. So at the same time, we'll look forward to seeing that next week. The CFTC chairman, he came out and said that there is now precedent in the Illinois court. And the Illinois court has ruled that Bitcoin and Ethereum are in fact commodities. And therefore, everything is moving forward with the SEC officially ending some more of its investigations into stablecoin. And so the stablecoin investigation, the Wells notice last year that was issued to Paxos, one of the largest bank trust companies that is responsible for launching stablecoins for other companies that wants to do that. The investigation was announced that it ends today. And it declared that BUSD, the USD stablecoin that was built on top of Paxos in partnership with Binance, is not in fact a security. And this is interesting given that BlackRock is also pushing forward their Treasury-backed fund with one of the companies that I invested into, Securitize. And this is going at a rapid pace. So we're going to be deciding, is it the CFTC or is it the SEC? We know that they all want to find the billions of dollars to prop up their institutions rather than giving it to the victims of many of the scams that we'll be covering as well. Because talking of scams, neither the CFTC or the SEC, despite the fact that the FBI was arresting some of the people in Germany that we're now suing that were involved in the Celsius Ponzi Scheme, which was a $20 billion Ponzi scheme that led to the theft and loss of $3 billion of creditors' money. And that was including 650,000 people, many of whom were persuaded by the lying pieces of shit that run the Ponzi scheme that we're now suing in order to put their lifetime savings and their retirement funds all within what they called safer than a bank, because they said that 80% of all the revenue from the Ponzi scheme that they weren't calling a Ponzi scheme at the time is going to be going to those people. Full disclosure, I am a creditor, which means that I will be becoming a shareholder in the company from the re-emergence. Spent a couple of years supporting creditors on that. And now we had a historical moment where we're now suing the insiders. Because what did they do? They took all of their money out. They knew it was a Ponzi scheme and claimed that it wasn't. And they took as much of their money out and they ran away as soon as the ship went down sinking. So now the Celsius creditors, you know, one of the things, the tragic things about this is some people put 100% of their Bitcoin into this thing. Now, fortunately, because I was risk managing and I was only experimenting with borrowing against my Bitcoin and then trying to have some of the yield pay for the interest on that, it was money that I can play with. It made me one of the largest creditors in the bankruptcy case, but I risk managed, I move on. I never put a big chunk at risk, but many people had 100% at risk because they believed the stuff that the pieces of shit behind this scam were selling them. And so I want to name and shame, and I'd like to go through the case before we go through the macro and the geopolitical. But the nooks and cronies, nooks and cronies, I don't know what I'm trying to say. The little TLDR, let's call it, of the 138 pages that I read last night for you so that you don't have to read it. You're welcome. Celsius basically spent $558 million of clients' Bitcoin and stable coins and took that digital hard sound money and use it to pump the price of their shitcoin that they printed that is worse than many of the fiat currencies that people print out there, and told the world that this is the future of finance. So they took Bitcoin, just like the German government, and they sold client Bitcoin and bought Cell token, a token that they created out of thin air, Why would they do that? Well, because they wanted to do what many of the governments do. They wanted to defraud, like the central banks, the people that were depositing with them, out of their money through the small confiscation of their wealth. Because they structured this token where if the price goes up, it would trigger off tens of millions of dollars worth of sell token to give to the executives and the staff as bonuses. And so they said to the traders, if you take client Bitcoin illegally and spend it on sale, it will push the price up. And if we get the price to certain triggers, then we can give all those tokens to our executives. And they said that if it hits the price of $1.50, we'll give tens of millions of sell token to the executives. They got all this free sell token. And if you get it to $5, then we'll give ourselves a bunch of sell token. And then they set it up where they were selling their sell token at the same time as taking the client Bitcoin. So they put the executives next to the client Bitcoin and got the insiders and their traders to sell the client's digital hard sound assets by saying, we'll promise you some yield on it, and completely lying about what they were doing. They said that they were going to be using it to issue collateralized loans and that interest was paying the yield, which is a complete lie. And then they said that 80% of the revenue is going to pay the yield. And guess what Alex Mashinsky did? Alex Mashinsky took $73 million worth of sell token and used it to scoop up those client Bitcoins and those client stable coins. And then when things went wrong and he tried to fill the hole, he went short Bitcoin and the trade worked against him. And everybody co-opted into the process. And suddenly he had hundreds of millions of loss that went into billions of losses over time by shorting Bitcoin, but ensuring that he took out his Bitcoin by selling the sell token that he got by pumping the price of that sell token. We have a word for that. When your name is Madoff, we call it a Ponzi scheme. This was a complete Ponzi scheme. And who else was the co-founder? Daniel Leon. We know that you took out 21 million in the exact same way. And remember Nuke Goldstein. Nuke Goldstein was meant to be the good guy. Well, he took out $5 million in the very same way. And then what did they do with the sell tokens that were left on the platform that they didn't withdraw? Well, they left those for creditors, because what did they do? They used it as collateral in order to borrow tens of millions of dollars against the sell token that they had pumped the price of. And then they went and sold those shares to shareholders, saying that they were solvent, and they managed to get the Canadian pension fund to deposit $600 million or so of Canadian pension fund money. Even the government of the Kingdom of Bhutan deposited money into Celsius to get that yield and withdrew that money as well. So the insiders took loans against the sell token, pulled out loads of USDC, left all the worthless sell token within the platform, used it as collateral, and then bought real estate so that then when the Federal Reserve pushes the price of real estate up, they benefit and get on the right side of inflation, and they buy some Bitcoin with it so that they can even try and counter their defense. And so we need to sue the MFs. So we're suing them on 36 different counts. And if you read through those 36 different counts, they lied on the funding of the initial ICO. So they lied about the funding. Mashinsky never paid the $18 million that he promised to pay that he owes to the estate. He lied about the percentage of gross revenue. It was never connected. The rates were never connected to any revenue because the whole thing was unprofitable all along, and they just pumped the price of sell token, marked it to market to try and make it look like it was solvent. And there was no connection between the 80-20 lie that he told everybody every week. He also, all of them lied about the directors' sale of sell token. He told everyone that they weren't selling, they were buying. They also lied about the collateralization of the loans. He said that all the loans were collateralized when there were tens of millions hundreds of millions of loans that were not collateralized so that they could get higher interest. They also lied about the trading strategies. They said they were market neutral when they were actually taking directional risk and just YOLOing with client money. They also took almost $1 billion, over $1 billion of client money, and sent it to a company called KeyFi, where Alex Mashinsky and Nuke Goldstein were the shareholders against with the person that stole the money from creditors as well, that we are currently suing and trying to settle with in court. So it wasn't enough what they did. They then took more of the client money and sent it over to a company that they were shareholders of. They lied about their regulatory compliance. They said that they were compliant when they weren't. They lied about the legal rights of the customers that had assets. They said that they were entitled to them. They never told them it was a security. So now who did that? Well, let's name and shame. So we are now suing Alex Mashinsky, the face of the crime. We're not going to call him Daniel Leon. Let's call him his real name because he's trying to hide it. Shilomi Daniel Leon, who is now hiding in Israel and has a AI startup where the number one customer is the Prime Minister's office of Israel. And they are doing business together despite the fraud that they're being involved with. We also have, again, sorry if I'm getting these name wrongs. It's not Nuke. Nuke's your fake name. Hanoch Goldstein, who's got a new AI startup and is telling us about all the future of AI that he's building. We've now got Ronnie Coven Pavin, who apparently is hiding out in Israel as well. Harumi Arara Thompson, Jeremiah Beadley, Johannes Trutler from Germany, Christine Mechan Mashinsky, i.e. Chrissy Mashinsky, who tried to tell everybody that it was me that stole all the money because I was one of the largest creditors and that everybody should come to me to get the money because we were trying to repackage the company. Also, Eliza Landers, who works for the IDF in the media department in Israel, and AM Ventures Holdings LLC, a shell company for Alex Mashinsky, and Koala One LLC, another shell company for Alex Mashinsky, and Koala 2 LLC, another fraudulent shell company for Alex Mashinsky, and Koala 3 LLC, another fraudulent company for Alex Mashinsky, and Alchemy Capital Partners LLC, another fraudulent shell company for S. Daniel Leon, and Bits of Sunshine LLC, another fraudulent company for Nuke Goldstein, who thinks that Sunshine is a nice name for his shell company, and 413 LLC, another shell company for Nuke Goldstein, the so-called good guy of the bunch. And we're all suing them to make sure that those insider clawbacks. Now, there is a very controversial thing that also came with that this week, and that is that there was more clawback lawsuits announced as well. And this is really a crazy, controversial subject. But it was announced that 1,500 customers that withdrew their cryptocurrency 90 days prior to the bankruptcy settled because the Litigation Oversight Committee came after the customers that withdrew 90 days before. Now, this is a crazy concept that exists in US bankruptcy, but it's written into the law. And the idea is that those that withdrew got 100% of their money. Those that stayed around got a lot less of their money. And the whole thing is meant to even out so that they put back the money, they settle, and then it's distributed amongst all creditors in the 90-day prior. They get a lower recovery and the others get a slightly higher recovery. It's a crazy concept. It exists, but that's what it's designed for. They go and sue all the customers that withdrew their funds, but they gave everyone an opportunity to settle at 13.5 or 13.75% if they withdrew more than $100,000. Those that withdrew less than 100,000, I don't think that they're being come after. But about 100 million were settled, which will be distributed amongst the other creditors. But those that didn't settle, the docket was filled with 5,000 lawsuits suing the investors that decided that they didn't want to settle and they withdrew. But rather than using the price of the bankruptcy last year when Bitcoin was about $20,000, they're now suing for the price in June when Bitcoin was about $65,000. And so they are now pursuing all of those lawsuits to use the clawback law in order to get more money in to distribute it amongst the estate. I think it's ultra aggressive that they're using today's prices. But my guess is that they're being ultra aggressive because they said you could have settled for 13.5%, but now we're coming after that, and they probably want you to settle. They've all been filed on the court, and so not only is it the insiders, but they're coming after through this clawback clause in the bankruptcy for those that withdrew 90 days before. An interesting thing when you're dealing with a US company that is operating a Ponzi scheme. And look at some of the people, you can see some of the largest amounts that were withdrawn. To give you an idea, somebody withdrew $140 million that they're now coming after, and that would have been money that would have gone to creditors. They got their money out. They made the right decision. But these are really, really big numbers. So it's something that happens in the US bankruptcy code. And as I said, one of those, I'm not sure if it was there. I didn't look into the filing because it got lost in the 5,000 different cases. But one of them is the Kingdom of Bhutan, which is a pro-Bitcoin country whose sovereign had shitloads of money on Celsius, and the government is actually mining Bitcoin as part of the kingdom's policy. But yeah. So that is that subject. Let me know in the comments section what you think of this. I'm not sure. I think this is something that is very unique just to the US bankruptcy system. I've not seen it in any other jurisdiction. And it's why at Bank to the Future, we segregate all of our client money through a regulated virtual asset and registered virtual asset service provider as they move from registrations to regulations, segregated, subject to audit requirements. So they are completely separated. So you don't end up in a situation where our money is commingled and you have these crazy clawback types of things. And this is why regulations should exist. But the SEC and the regulators, even though they were coming after Celsius, they allowed it to grow. The Department of Justice arrested some of those people that were listed there early. The CFO got arrested as well in Israel. And, this all of these different telltale signs were there. Right. So that's the end of that subject now. Let's move through a few more different announcements. And then we can try and pick in the macro section. And if we've got time, some of the geopolitical events that happened this week as well. Oh, by the way, if you are a Celsius creditor or Celsius shareholder, we've got a top tax firm, and we're going to be doing a webinar this Thursday. If you go over to my blog on simondixon.com, there's an update on the blog. One of the blog posts is 3 important updates for Celsius creditors. You can head over there and you can register if you're a non-US creditor. There was lots of tax advice for those that want to write off and claim Ponzi analysis in the US, and the non-US creditors kind of got left behind. We've got a top creditor from the UK that's sharing their opinion. And also, we put together a recovery club for those that are looking to build their recovery plan and use technology. Next week, Thursday, the 18th of July, head over to my blog, simondixon.com, and you can register for that webinar if you want to know how to do the tax write-off and get a tax opinion around how they're treating it as well. So that's for non-US Celsius creditors, as I said, and that will be happening next week. What else is happening? Soon also, if you want to take delivery of those Ionic Digital shares as a non-US creditor, then you can still go on to the wealth building solutions on simondixon.com and sign up for that exclusive recovery club. And we can take delivery of those shares and take care of all the things you need to do to maximize your recovery. We built all the technology for me. and offered it to other people as well. Also, the company that's about to go public, they made an announcement, Ionic Digital, that they have a new CFO. This could be good news or bad news. In the webinar next week, we'll share our thoughts around that as well. Speaking of public companies, we've covered in different broadcasts that MetaPlanet is the company in Japan that is kind of copying the MicroStrategy strategy on Bitcoin strategy on a smaller scale. They announced that they're purchasing 400 million yen worth of Bitcoin. It's not that big a position, but they're looking to build their balance sheet. And if you're on the Japanese stock exchange, which recently hit the parity after the pump and dump crash of the 80s, that recovered as well. But there are some serious problems that we're seeing with the Japanese yen that I think we'll be covering in future broadcasts. Also this week, all of the spot Ethereum ETF applications, they filed their S1s, which is what you need to do in order to be approved. And so there is set to be Ethereum spot ETFs from Fidelity, from Van Eyck. Van Eyck is the one that's managing the assets for Celsius as well. 21 shares. Grayscale, which is the part of the digital currency group, and of course BlackRock as well. Speaking of BlackRock, their Beetle fund, I discovered that I talked about this in the beginning. It is put together with Securitize. Securitize is a company that we raised finance for at Bank to the Future. Myself and other Bank to the Future investors pulled together money in an early funding round. They've now got the largest tokenized fund that tokenizes treasuries through the Securitized partnership, and they just passed 500 million, so $500 million in that fund, all built upon the Ethereum blockchain. So of course BlackRock's launching their ETH ETF and telling the Congress members that it's time to approve the ETH ETF. And they also, there's about, about $1.8 billion of tokenized funds just like this. And so this is really, them, Wall Street, putting their bet on tokenization and using proof of stake networks as the backbone for that technology. We know that it should be done on Bitcoin. It probably will be done on Bitcoin in the future, but this is what we got at the moment. So what else do we have? Speaking of TradFi, $1.6 trillion asset manager, Goldman Sachs, they announced that they're going to be putting more tokenization projects this year and copying BlackRock, and all the TradFis are now getting into that. They're probably either going to be trying to do it on their private blockchains or doing it on the Ethereum proof of stake network as they move forward, because they are getting ready for the securitization of everything on blockchains so that it can be interoperable between their central bank digital currencies as the banks get wrecked as we transition into a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs in the future. So we've covered this in many broadcasts in the past. Even the interesting thing is one of the DAOs that wanted to back some of their stable coins, they voted to invest in the securitized funds because they can do it through tokenization and diversify what's backing it through the BlackRock ETF, the BlackRock fund that invests in treasuries. So you can see how this interoperability, as we transition to AI learning code and managing central bank digital currencies instead of humans, is starting to play out with Aladdin's technology that has all of the data of the world's financial markets. And BlackRock is getting ready to have all of the tokenization data. You know where this is going. And if you stick with me and Bitcoin Hard Talk, we'll make sure you're ahead of all the trends, and none of these things are surprises. So let's move over to the macro side. On the macro side, US inflation fell to 3%. The market's wising up a little bit. We had a bit of a correction prior to this in the market. And the market, having lower than expected inflation, the market didn't react as it normally would. The reason for that is because the world knows that everyone on the wrong side of the central bank is broke. They're broke. And we know that cartelling inflation is not what it says. Why? Because we knew it was 10%. and it was 8%, and it was 7%, and it was 6%. So inflation is cumulative. It's inflation on inflation. So the price is already unaffordable for the masses. There's a whole generation that will never be able to own their own house, that are never going to be safe assets, that are trying to get into the Bitcoin market so that they can reverse the trend and protect themselves. But even though it's gone down to 3%, that's 3% of the extortionate price that they could never afford anyway. So prices going up. And that's harming everyday people, which is why we're getting all of this popularism and we're getting this extreme left and right that creates the types of environments that lead to revolutions and civil wars with external parties that then come along and say it's time to change the world order. And we end up with these external conflicts that we're experiencing right now that we need to de-escalate, but the proof of weapons keeps funding and sending money over to those countries. Those countries then spend it back into America, prop up the share prices, the military-industrial complex. Then they use those money to lobby Congress, and then Congress votes in laws in favor of those that are funding it. And that causes more inflation, and we pretend that this is called a democracy. And we know it's not. And then everyone says, hoorah, hoorah, inflation is under control. Please lower rates. Please pump some more money into my stock market. I need my real estate and stocks to go up because I don't give a shit about the vast majority of people in the world that are homeless, can't afford anything, and are now addicted to drugs and causing lots of crime in the streets. And then we need to blame that on all the immigrants, the legal immigrants. And obviously, we then have more and more defense. And more and more defense and more violence. And we move into this world that needs to reset itself into hard money, reverse the trend. But you don't need to wait for governments. You can get ahead of it with Bitcoin. Companies can get ahead of it with Bitcoin, and governments that could stop selling their Bitcoin and do more like El Salvador can reverse the trend, as we know. But the market will love it. Don't be fooled, because we know that it's cumulative inflation and is still rising at 3% on something that can't be afforded. Now, what does this lead to? Well, it leads to massive dissatisfaction from those that feel the government is screwing us, and therefore we want more and more from our governments, and we need to shift from the right to the left and make inflation worse. If we demand more stuff and we have a government that will do and provide more stuff with us and spend more, well, the central banks love it anyway, because that's the agenda, because they can roll over the printer and they can extort more out of the people. And so as a resistance, everybody says, right, let's get rid of those right-wing governments and put those left-wing governments in. We saw it in UK, out with Rishi Sunak, who is operating the same system as Keir Starmer, who's operating the same system and is controlled by the powers that be. The Fed chair, Jerome Powell, he came out and says that the data does not support the greater confidence in inflation and that it is under control, and therefore the Federal Reserve will not be cutting rates. And he has said that all along, but the market's saying you've got to do it because the election cycle for the US is coming. France even ended up in a situation where it has a new coalition government with 3 different parties that doesn't even know how it's going to govern, and riots in the streets as a result, which brings us into the geopolitical side and this movement from right to left of the exact same system perpetrated because we know that if you want to take back control, you have to control money. It's money that makes the difference. And left and right do the exact same thing. They operate fiat-based Ponzi schemes in a system that creates more money than debt, and therefore the interest on the debt can never be repaid. So you have to go deeper in debt, the companies have to go deeper in debt, and the governments have to go deeper in debt. But if you're close to the central bank, you get the low interest rate while everyone else gets extorted. I'm sorry if I repeat myself all the time, but I want you, repetition is the mother of all understanding. One of the people in the French coalition government, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, je ne sais quoi. He has a left-wing government, and sorry, the left people, if you think that me impersonating the French accent is something that shouldn't be done and is politically incorrect. But as soon as possible, they said the right thing. They're looking for the popular vote. They said they're going to give Palestine a state. So we now have approximately 150 countries all around the world on the geopolitical side that says Palestine should be free. And we know there's only one country in the world that veto votes in United Nations from the Security Council every single vote to make sure that Palestine is not free. And that is the US. And we all know why, because that's how the system works. And so all eyes were on the enemy of the proof of weapons network, which of course is who we are told in the media is the enemy. Now, I'm no fan of any government. They're all the same. They're all operating debt-based Ponzi schemes. They're all oppressing the people. And Bitcoin is a resistance movement that we should use against every single regime, whether it be a monarch in the Middle East, whether it be a revolutionary regime in a country like Iran, or whether it be a so-called democracy that is controlled by lobby groups like America, or whether it be an ex-monarchy that is over to a government and is meant to be another democracy that just does whatever America tells it because it's a fallen empire because the British pound could not maintain its gold backing. You shouldn't listen to any of them. But we are told, wherever you are told that the biggest bogey monster exists, is normally the sides where you need to look at why they are telling you that you need to feel that way. And ironically, whenever you go into the truth, you realize that they're on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network. And so they need to justify the atrocities that they are committing in order to prop up the military industrial complex that controls Congress and the governments around the world. And so we are told that the Iran election, nobody would come out. There was over 50% that came out to vote. Again, I'm no fan of Iranian politics, but I am definitely not a fan of regime change, because regime change takes a country that's working and has people resisting, and people always struggle against their governments, and they should struggle against their governments, but it turns it into a country like Iraq and Syria that leads to the death of millions of people, and it leads to failed states with puppet governments, and governments using money that falls outside congressional and government control, where they pass that money through these slush funds abroad and support organizations like the four-letter organization ISIS that is controlled by intelligence agencies in France, in UK, in America, in Israel. And they are told they fulfill an agenda that makes you feel a certain way about a certain class of people when there are billions of those and only about 50,000 of those, so that they can make you feel scared and they can tell you that we justify what we're about to do. And obviously Iran is that person at the moment. So Iran has a new president. Let's have another name that I can butcher. Masoud Pezeshkian. Pezeshkian is the new president of Iran because the last one fell down in a helicopter accident, we're told. He said that he's committed to the mission to liberate Palestine, but also try and negotiate with Western allies and bring Iran back into normal politics. So for those of you that don't know the Iran politics and why we're told we have to hate them, and we're told because they don't have any women rights and hijabs and stuff. And again, if you've got a struggle against that, then that's your struggle against your government. But it doesn't mean we go and blow them all up and lead and turn a country into failed states, like in Yemen, like in Syria, and like all the countries that Israel says that we should be blowing up. And because intelligence agency makes you feel a certain way. But they, in the politics, said that they would like to negotiate a new nuclear deal. I've covered this in previous broadcast. Essentially, in 79, Iran had a revolution and they overthrew the monarchy that was implanted, as it was in all countries in the Middle East, by the British Empire in order to control those regions and send all their oil abroad because they needed those resources. And in Iran was the one that got away. It had a revolution against it. Basically, at that time, Israel told us that we should see Iran as the enemy because they illegally took nuclear weapons from the United States and started building their own nuclear weapons. They wanted to be the only country in the Middle East that was a nuclear force. And by the way, you have to sanction countries that do that, but Israel is only just being sanctioned by a few countries, but America hasn't sanctioned it yet, even though it is completely illegal and against all the agreements. Israel wanted to remain the only nuclear country. And so at that time, Iran became the enemy because it was a revolutionary guard against the monarchies. And at that stage, they started getting sanctioned and sanctioned and sanctioned. And they negotiated a nuclear deal that said that they will open up to inspections and they will do what the nuclear deal says. And the West kept reneging on that agreement because Israel does not want any other military nuclear country in the Middle East. Because if Iran gets one, then Saudi Arabia will want one. And then they may have peace because nukes are meant to deter people from invading each other and creating these forever wars. And there was one president in the United States that wanted to actually fight against this. And that was the president that said, we are going to uphold the illegal nuclear weapon that Israel has and make sure that we don't allow that to happen and get nuclear peace, which was JFK. And JFK also wanted to recognize the Israeli lobbies that were controlling US politics as foreign entities. And he was passing law to classify the Israeli controls of US politics and the nuclear weapon that Israel had. And unfortunately, he never made it from that and was assassinated. After that, Iran started building up their nuclear capacity, and that led to more and more sanctions and more and more sanctions. And this is when Netanyahu told Americans that they need to be concerned about all the war on terror. And we had this whole thing. And then we had all these operations and everything that we saw before that. And that's why you think what you think today, because the news tells you that you're meant to think like that. So a nuclear deal was negotiated, but it was Trump that canceled it, went and assassinated some of the political leaders and military leaders in Iran, and decided to move and hand over Jerusalem and make it the capital of Israel, even though it was a disputed territory, by putting the embassy there, and then also canceled the nuclear deal, as I said, and at this stage started saying that settlements from Israel to Palestine are, even though every single country ruled it illegal, every single president in the United States said that those expansive settlements were illegal, where essentially Israel just comes, knocks people out of their home, kills Palestinians, and builds on their lands. He said it, but Trump said for the first time in 2019 that it may not be illegal, and that was the first time that ever happened. And so obviously from then we're told that Iran is the enemy. The resistance movement built up. And we know exactly what came from that. Now, that drove Iran, Russia, and China all closer because they were the most sanctioned countries, and China is now being threatened to be more and more sanctioned. And it brings us to where we are today. So let's go through some of the geopolitical events that happened this week and what happened in the NATO conference as well. So Iran and Russia, they finalized their integration of their national payment system for dedollarization, which is officially ditching the US dollar for trade. They have completely removed any trade within US dollars. The BRICS corridor, which is putting together a CBDC, we shall see, against what will be the American CBDC. And hopefully, if you get democracy and constitutional policies, you can get the DOJ to transfer those Bitcoin over to Treasury. But the BRICS has now ditched the US dollar for fish exports. So last week or the week before, I announced that they've created this new grain exchange that settles in local currencies rather than dollars. Well, the fish export market is about 10.4 billion. They're going to be using the same technology so that you can trade fish outside of the US dollar system. We had the whole Saudi Arabia doing more and more deals in oil and settling oil without the dollar. And BRICS has essentially become, they're using the same mechanism as the grain exchange that Russia is going to be launching from Moscow as well. And of course, Russia's pushing their military industrial complex. But we know that the Russian military industrial complex is controlled by the government, whereas the US one is controlled by private companies. And therefore, you get this more covert interference where the intelligence agencies are co-opted through intelligence, and then the slush money exists outside America, and things happen like we've had 65 different regime changes. 65 regime changes of covert operations never voted on by the US that exist completely outside congressional control, that has led to death, destruction, and the toppling of regime and regime after regime. Just so you know, India exports about 17% of all fish. That's worth about $4.6 billion. So it's another movement towards an alternative system. And China is the second largest exporter. And at the same time, Saudi Arabia, they went out and issued a warning to the Western G7 alliances. They said, do not seize the $300 billion of frozen funds from Russia and send it over to Ukraine. So the relationship with Saudi Arabia, they rely upon US for their defense, but they're looking at joining the BRICS side. And so they're playing both sides at the moment and deciding whether to work with China, whether to work with America. India's deciding those middle regions, who they want to work with. And some European countries like Hungary are starting to move away from what they consider NATO escalation. In terms of economics, are these sanctions working? Well, the World Bank, they came up and they said they've upgraded Russia now. They're now a high-income nation, more than before the sanctions. They've estimated that the gross income per capita is about $14.25 thousand annually. This comes basically 2 years after the Western sanctions. Their debt to GDP ratio is better than it has ever been. And Russia is now one of the largest GDP in terms of purchasing power, the parity purchasing power in Europe compared to its European counterparts as well. So sanctions no longer work, which is why we're having de-dollarization. This is good for America, so America can retreat and we can have multiple currencies in a Bitcoin world and this multipolar global south, global north system that everything is moving towards, that hopefully allows us to avoid World War III and de-escalate, but everything's moving towards escalation. India's prime minister, Modi decided to go and visit Russia and Moscow as well. This is all signaling that's happening as people decide which side, and two-sidism, which one they're going to pick. And Putin came out. There was a lot of posturing ahead of the NATO conference and during the NATO conference. Putin came out and said that NATO is pushing the world to World War III, and they're by supporting Ukraine. Rather than supporting negotiations, this is a subject depending on which side of the equation you sit. All I know is that more and more Ukrainians are dying, and there are more atrocities happening from Russia. Prior to the conference, there was a targeted attack on a children's hospital within Ukraine and retaliations within Russia, and more civilians are dying, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. But what was really bad during the NATO conference? Well, it was President Biden. He did two things. Well, firstly, at the beginning, he said a mumble, and I'm not sure what he actually said. I listened to it time and time again in shock. But in some translations of what his mumble said, it sounded very similar to, pardon my French, I'm effing the NATO head's wife. Something along those lines. And that came out in the middle of a sentence. So what else did he do at the end? Well, look at my Twitter feed and I pass the video on. You tell me what you think of this. Biden did the introduction for Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. And he called the president of Ukraine in front of the entire NATO summit and introduced him as Putin. He welcomed President Putin to the stage retracted it and said, oh, I'm focused too much on defeating Putin. This is what we are meant to believe is the next contender to do another 4 years. And we know that's not going to happen. That's why the debate happened early. The money's all flowing where it's meant to go. The Israeli money and the lobby money flew over to Trump. Trump's now coming after the Bitcoin community in order to get that money over, supporting Bitcoin. And hopefully we can create some resistance movements because both are the same. As we know, if you agree with my politics, you will know I will never forgive Rishi Sunak. I will never forgive Biden for what they have done to the children and the women and the men, as we have witnessed firsthand what 10 countries have gone to the highest court to prove is a genocide that has changed the way I will look at the world forever. And don't forget to continue looking to that, because it is our money that's supporting that. And now we have the new United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. Obviously, he went straight over to NATO, the conference, in his first week, and said that it is okay to use UK missiles within Russian borders, when Putin has already said he considers that an escalation. And we're getting more and more posturing and more posturing. The Hungary prime minister came over from Europe, decided that he was going to visit Russia, and he gave his take on the war in Ukraine. And he said, China has a peace plan. We know that China has a peace plan between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which sidesteps Abraham Accords and can create genuine peace in the Middle East that can lead to a retreat of US foreign policy within the Middle East so that the world can get on again. But America doesn't want China to look like a powerful nation. So instead, it sidestepped Iran and created all of this wartime escalation that led to what we have seen and what we are experiencing right now. It said that the United States runs a war policy. Don't trust me. This is the president of Hungary saying China has a peace plan. United States has a war policy. Europe, instead of having its own assumptions and strategic approach, is simply copying American position. And so is UK. He summed it up right. Say what you want. I don't know anything about Hungarian politics, but the Hungarian president is summarizing the accurate representation of what is happening. If all you do, politics aside, bias aside, media aside, propaganda aside, is follow the money and look at the financial flows of what's causing all of this death and destruction based upon the Fiat Proof of Weapons Network. And NATO officially announced that it will be sending F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine for its war against Russia. This brings in the whole situation with China and Taiwan, because Taiwan creates the chips that are needed in those F-16 fighter jets. And this causes escalation towards China wanting to reunify with Taiwan as a result of the atrocities that the British Empire did during the Opium Wars, that led to the civil war in China, that led to the creation of the drug trafficking industry all around the world, that then led to the uprising and the supporting when the Bank of Japan and the Federal Reserve supported each other to push these different agendas through. And obviously Taiwan ended up with its own government and now these problematic politics. And hopefully we can just remain as the same, because if you watch my video on what would happen if China did reunify with Taiwan, $2.3 trillion of economic destruction that would make the 2008 global financial crisis, and all of the companies that we use and rely upon for our computers, for our internet, for everything, would be up in smokes. So we really don't want that to happen. And so we don't want these escalations, and we want our governments to get on. But the Proof of Weapons Network ensures that that doesn't happen when you follow the money. And so now Putin came out and saying that if these F-16 fighter jets, they're legitimate targets for Moscow, even if they happen in third-party countries. And so this is just moving more and more. Maybe it's just posturing, but we're not moving in the right direction. Putin also said that these F-16 fighter jets, he sees it as an escalation. and this could potentially lead to what he's calling World War III as well. What else did we say? We saw just before that Putin hit a child's hospital in NATO, and of course, as they should, the world was up in arms, saying, what kind of war crime is that? And of course, they're right to say that if it happened that way. I'm more skeptical now that I've seen all these covert operations and how everybody lies to us, because I followed every step, every single day, speaking to people on the ground in Palestine when they were experiencing massacres in real time ever since October the 7th, and not one Western condemnation until it was not even possible to hide it anymore, with every single hospital and even the $320 million apparently port that America said it's bringing in order to bring humanitarian aid in, because Israel isn't letting any in because it's exercising famine in order to kill people and making sure there's no hospitals, and starvation, and controlling the water, controlling the land, controlling the internet, controlling every type of control they possibly can and get away with. America said, we're putting a port. Guess what? That port was dismantled, and it did not deliver any humanitarian aid, but it did deliver American troops on the ground and the ability to rescue those 4 hostages that we're told are just hostages. Even some of those were from the military operations, and they were IDF soldiers, from the footage that we have all seen and put and connected together. So why was it packaged as such a different thing and led to the assassination of over 270 Palestinians as well? And that's all they used it, and now they've taken it back and they didn't deliver any humanitarian aid. Why are we being lied to? Once you understand that, you ask the question, what else are we being lied to? And a letter was published this week, almost at the end, and this is when you start to really understand the atrocities. So it was published into the medical journal, so that very few read it. Only academics read it, which is a medical journal by the LNIT, if that means anything to you. But it estimated that the actual numbers of deaths of Palestinian civilians and children and women and those that they call whatever they call them, that they can't distinguish, in Gaza is now 186,000. That's their estimate. And so when they're saying these atrocities that Hummus, I'll say that for the algorithm, you know what I mean, is exaggerating the truth from we believe that everything that I've seen saying that those death and destruction is significantly greater, and we're only going to find out when it is too late. Even Israeli media is now reporting, because of all the protests within Israel, and remember, fight against the atrocities of your government. Don't support your government atrocities. That's what we, the people, are for. Well, the Israeli media is reporting that the Hannibal Directive was in fact inflicted on October the 7th. For those of you that don't know what that is where Israel, in order to prevent hostages being taken, they had permission to kill their own people, blow up all the cars, go around all of the different kibbutzes, which are the military operations, fire indiscriminately and ensure that no Israelis are taken as hostages. And they did that. This is now being confirmed by Israeli media. And we weren't told any of that. We were told that there were mass grapes, if you know what I mean, and atrocities, and that there was this mass assassination. And I'm sure some of that happened, but it's clear, and it described it as going to those kibbutz, which were military, to get military people to bring back. And Israel blew up lots of their own people because they don't want any of them to be taken as hostages. Look it up, the Hannibal Directive, and there were IDF soldiers that admit this, and there were first-hand witnesses that this is exactly what happened. So a lot of those people were killed by their own as the Hummus went in order to try and get those military targets. And now the United Nations has released a report saying that there is no evidence of the mass grapes and the atrocities. and that all of those were the people that were essentially killed as a result of the Hannibal Directive. And we are given a completely different story to what happened on October the 7th. The truth is completely different, and it is going to come out. So why were we told to feel a certain way? Because when you follow the money, you know that we're all being scammed, which is what I've been saying from day one of these atrocities, and I will never look at the world again the same. And it makes me want to build the resistance movement of Bitcoin against the atrocities of central banking that is funding this proof of weapons network, that is pitting all of us against each other because of that rich-poor divide, where the poor are being suffered from inflation, propping up the assets of all of us that are doing something to protect ourselves, where our Bitcoin, our real estate, our stock markets, creating more and more wealth inequality that's leading to regime change, when we know that money is being directed into controlling our politicians that we're told are democracies, and these wars and atrocities are being exposed on WikiLeaks and the media for what they are: a complete atrocity against we the people, being lied to. And now we have our own media outlets that hopefully I won't get banned, and I'm able to continue delivering what is happening in Bitcoin, what is happening in macro, and is what is happening in the geopolitical side. Love it or hate it, I will continue to spread the truth as I see it and connect it to the genuine hope that I only see, which is Bitcoin allows people enough escape velocity to escape the system and be wealthy enough to actually expose things so that we don't have to listen and bow down to the special interest groups trying to scam us. And we can do it with peace, we can do it with love, and we can do it with unity. Because always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting times in financial history. Many are going to get wrecked, most are going to get wrecked, others are going to do really well. I want you to be on the right side of this change and to actually understand what's really happening. Leave some comments below, like, share, retweet. We want more and more people. I would love more and more people to understand these messages, and join me on simondixon.com to build and protect your wealth for a Bitcoin, AI, and CBDC world. Protect yourself from the oppression of CBDCs. Replace your income from worked income, as AI probably takes your job, with portfolio and investment income and a Bitcoin world. Peace.